There's a fish.
What's going on, everybody? This is Talon with TFC, and today we are going to be going over everything you need to know on how to fly fish Stillwaters. I say you know a lot, so I just thought I'd let you know.
Good. I'm glad I know now.
First things first, if you're... That's it. That's all. To a lot of people, Stillwaters can be very intimidating. That's why we're going to be going over the basics and, everything that you need to know in order to be successful when fly fishing Stillwaters. If you're going to fish a Stillwater, I think it's important to pick up some maps and do your research. Knowing where you're at, knowing what you're trying to fish, your location, all of that, I think it's important to pick out spots and to have a plan, to be detailed about what you're going to do and where you're going to fish. If you're on a boat, having a depth finder can be huge. And what I mean by that is, what are you looking for with your depth finder? Are you trying to find weed beds? Are you looking for drop-offs? Are you trying to find a specific depth that you think they're holding at? If it's late summer and they're deeper in the water column, you might be looking for 16 to 22 feet. If it's early spring or middle of spring, you're probably going to be looking for 8 to 12 feet or even shallower. So using that depth finder, knowing what you're looking for, it can play a huge role in being successful when you're out fishing a Stillwater. Location. So what are you specifically looking for when you're going to go fish a Stillwater? Are you looking for points? Are you looking for weed beds? There's a lot of different things that hold fish, and based on time of year, a lot of things can be successful. So that brings us to our 5 different locations that you should be looking for when fly fishing a Stillwater. Our first one is weed beds. Weed beds are going to be fishing hot all year round. All of the food for trout, it is where everything correlates to. It is home. The edges of those weed beds and those weed lines are going to be travel corridors for those trout. There's going to be other things like leeches, crayfish, smaller bait fish that are going to be using those weed lines as protection, not only over top of them, but you can specifically target those weed lines as well and find a lot of fish. And especially if there's hatches going on, chironomids, calabatus, whatever's popping, they're definitely going to be hovering over those weed beds, looking for anything emerging off of those weeds to pick up as an easy meal. So knowing where weed beds are at and the depth of those can be a great place to start fishing. For our second location on where to target fish when you're fly fishing a Stillwater, that would be drop-offs. There's a lot of drop-offs. I mean, obviously the shoreline around the whole lake is a drop-off, but specifically you can find those straight shelves that will hold fish, and there's most likely going to be a weed line or weed beds right where that shelf flattens out. So finding those shelves, finding those drop-offs and edges of lakes can also act as travel corridors for those trout. There's going to be a lot of fish that follow those drop-offs along the entire lake, especially during early, ice off or early middle spring.
You're on. Here, take it. Just like that.
Oh my gosh, I almost lost my rod, didn't I?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just gone.
I'm already in my backing. So like I was saying, those, especially when the chironomids are popping, calabatus, stuff like that, those weed beds, anywhere from 8 to 13 feet, fishing over those weed beds can produce a lot of fish. targeting those edges and those drop-offs and shelves, especially if you can find a weed bed right off of them, can be huge to finding fish. She is right here, Ada. Size 18 chironomid. There. What a fish. Well, fish. Our third place to target fish when you're fly fishing in Stillwater is going to be points. Points are similar to drop-offs. You're probably going to find drop-offs on both sides of that point, but looking for points in the lake and, you know, fishing directly off of them, they got to travel around and where you can find a big concentration of trout and whatever else is in that lake. So the fourth place to target fish is going to be river bottoms and river channels and creeks that come in. You know, there's a lot of places like Henry's Lake, for example, that has spring creeks running in that's feeding warm water into that lake. Knowing where those creeks are at, where those river bottoms are at, you know, if you have a main like spinning out here, where the South Platte river bottom is, that's going to be, you know, a deep area where you can find some weeds too. So knowing where river bottoms and river channels and where creeks come in will be another major location on where you can be successful finding fish. Our fifth and final location on where to target trout is going to be man-made structures. So, you know, if there's any railroad bottoms, road bottoms, you know, irrigation ditches that have been dug, humps, depressions like that, that's going to also hold a lot of fish, especially if it's lined up with, you know, weed beds surrounding it and other things like we talked about, like points or river bottoms or creeks coming in. If you can line all of those up, as many as you can together, that's going to hold a very large concentration of fish. One more thing when trying to figure out where you want to fish on a lake, figuring out where they won't be can be very helpful. I mean, there's a lot of places on a lake where there might be a few fish, but you're not going to find consistent fish. So looking for, you know, long, shallow flats, probably not going to hold fish. Anywhere that doesn't have any weeds, anywhere that doesn't have any depth changes, stuff like that, and trying to figure out where you think won't have fish, that can be a huge indicator on, you know, where you should go to actually find good concentrations of fish. So now that we talked about locations on how to find them, let's talk about techniques. One of the easiest ways and most successful ways is obviously using an indicator. When we're talking about using an indicator, you know, we're going to be using some type of subsurface bug. So leeches, chironomids, calabatus, damsels, you know, worms, eggs. There's a lot of different things that you can throw. But when I'm using an indicator, my favorite way to fish it, so that you get the depth right, is to actually clip those hemos onto your very bottom fly. Take those hemos, throw them in, let them sink to the bottom. And once they sink to the bottom, you can actually find that exact depth that you need that indicator to sit at so that your flies are sitting just above the bottom. During most times of the year, you know, no matter what depth you're at, the fish are going to most likely be on the bottom, right above those weeds. So making sure that your flies are sitting, you know, about a half a foot above those weeds is where you're going to find the most success. Sometimes they are up in the water columns, but for the most part, those fish are going to be just above the bottom of the lake or above those weeds. So aside from indicators, obviously you can throw streamers or twitch in leeches and that type of thing. When I'm throwing anything that I'm stripping back into me on lakes, I'm going to have some type of sinking line to get those flies down in the zone quicker, especially if I'm fishing anywhere from 10 to 20 feet when I'm stripping something. So if you have a sinking line, that's great. If you don't, you can get a sink leader that will help get that fly down as well. But making sure that your streamer is coming back right along the bottom will definitely help you find fish when using streamers in lakes. Another technique that can be very successful during, you know, early summer, midsummer, is using dries. So when those calabatus or damsels or chironomids are coming off hot, you can find some really good success on dries. Not only with those hatches, but throwing hoppers too. Sometimes those fish are going to come up looking for whatever's on top and throwing something that sticks out and stands out. Sometimes you don't have to necessarily match the hatch, but just throwing something that looks buggy will get the job done. So we talked about location, we talked about depth and techniques. That kind of brings us to flies and seasons. So paying attention to the hatches going on around you, what you think is going to be in the water, and what fish are feeding on, and also paying attention to the season and what the water temperatures are doing, what the weather is doing. All of those, kind of mesh together when trying to be successful fly fishing stillwaters. If it's spring, there's probably going to be leeches are probably going to be a good attractor bug down there, along with chironomids. In the spring and early part of May, the chironomids are just going to be popping. So everyone thinks when you're fishing with chironomids that you just go big or go home. That's not really the case. Using size anywhere from size 20 to 16s are going to be way more successful than your larger chironomids when you're fishing them under an indicator in early spring. As you go from spring to summer, it's going to be very active with bugs. There's going to be much bigger chironomids. You might start seeing calabatus and damsels, and you're going to be seeing a lot of different bugs, and they're going to be eating a lot of different things. So you can kind of mix up what you're throwing on. You can still throw leeches and stuff like that. Those are going to work year round, but you can kind of mix it up on what you're using. If you're going to throw chironomids, you can get away with a little bit bigger chironomids. Throwing some damsels and calabatus can be very productive as well. So just paying attention to the day, the weather, the sun, the water temperature, and what's hatching around you will help you be successful. I really think the fun thing about stillwaters is trying to, think about all of these different aspects and what goes into making you successful. Paying attention to where you're fishing, paying attention to the depth, paying attention to the water temperature and the weather, what the bugs are doing, the hatches going on around you, what depth you're fishing at, where they're at in the water column. There's so many different things that you tie together to, you can start mapping out kind of time of year. This is what they're doing, and this is what they're eating, and this is where they're at. I think that's the funnest thing about stillwater is every day's different. You're constantly searching for what they're doing on that day, where they're going to be, and what they're feeding on, and why. I think that's really the funnest part about being successful on stillwaters is learning why they're doing what they're doing. The biggest thing about fishing lakes like this is enjoying that grind, enjoying the rough days, because there's a lot of them, but when you find those good days, your work has paid off. Really just diving in and learning every day why they're doing what they're doing, and you can kind of piece it together like a puzzle and get a better idea of what you think they might be doing the next time you go out. So with all of this said and all of these tips and tricks, we're going to go and give it a shot and see if we can't get on a few fish. We'll see you out there. Oh my gosh.
Dude. There's a fish on.
Shut up. Shut up.
Okay, I've got the rod.
Oh my gosh, wait, we're gonna get a triple.
Wait, is this gonna be a? Are you freaking kidding me? Underneath the boat.
It almost took my. Was that my rod?
Yes, dude, your rod was in the water. I grabbed it by the frick as it went.
So, I hook a fish. Right after I hook that fish, you double up. We land the first fish. Then we land the second fish, and my rod, I got it unhooked. It was just sitting right under the boat. While we're landing the second fish, my rod almost launches into the water, and now we got 3 fish in the net.
We tripled. Two people tripled up.
It was the biggest crap show I've ever seen. Look
And
at
so
that.
this
Look
is
at that.
we've
That's
got
just a net full of fish. This is ridiculous. We're gonna release in the order we landed them. So there was the first fish. Just a nice rainbow. There he goes. Your first fish, I guess. Just a nice little brown.
Yep. Off and running.
And here was the one that.
Here's the
hit right
redheaded
under the boat.
stepchild that just couldn't stay off.
Oh my
gosh.
I have no words. None. So as you can see, we threw a few of these things together that we talked about earlier. You know, finding location, depth, what's hatching. You know, when you bring all those together, you see you can be pretty darn successful on Stillwaters, and it's pretty enjoyable as well. So we appreciate you following along. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you got any questions or comments, leave it on the comments below. Thank you for watching this video, and we'll see you next time. TFC signing out.